Karl Marx once wrote of Ireland, "Society is undergoing a revolution, like an earthquake sweeping houses before it." Like pretty much everything Marx wrote, it's more true today than it was when he wrote it. And I bring up Marx not to upset Enda Kenny, but more because the credit crisis is a huge biblical event. It demands radical, big picture thinking. Many of the things Marx talked about, governments colliding with markets, states getting involved in the economy, we see them happening before our eyes today. Secondly, and very, very importantly, the last 2 years I've lived the credit crisis. And I remember last October being called upon to explain what the hell is going on in markets. And the kind of places I turned were economic history, because this is the biggest, deepest, longest recession globally that we've seen since the 1930s. We haven't seen a recession of this type, or a crash of this type, since perhaps the 1907 bankers' panic or the Great Recession of 1873. So a lot of answers to our solutions lie in history. And if I sort of stand on the shoulders of giants and I look at what Marx said about economics, look at what he said about Ireland, one of the few economists who actually agrees with Marx is Adam Smith, and they agree on Ireland. And I take a long sweep back in economic history, go back to 1500. You look at some of the GDP numbers. The ratio of Irish GDP to that of the UK or to Europe in 1500, over 500 years ago, remained at about half for up to about 1987. Anyone who's read the work of Joe Lee, the preeminent history of modern Ireland, will know that he wrote about this long history of economic underachievement. So for a very, very long time we suffered a deeply unimpressive, underperforming economy. So then when our miracle happened, in many respects it's no surprise that we still find it hard to explain exactly what went on. It's no surprise either that to some extent we perhaps enjoyed it far too much. And I think it's no surprise now that we're still trying to figure out what happened 20 years ago and why is it all beginning to disintegrate now. And even the people who over the last 10 years have claimed the credit for the Celtic Tiger still can't explain why it's falling asunder. Today I think we've seen most of the financial effects of the credit crisis. In Ireland we are still deeply in the middle of the economic effects. Unfortunately, I think we're only beginning to see some of the social effects, and unfortunately the social effects in Ireland are going to be very, very grave. And we will also, I think, down the line see some very, very big political effects. I think the problem we have today is we have economists who are proposing economic solutions who are naive of the politics, who are ignorant of the social effects. We have politicians who are proposing upside-down, topsy-turvy economic solutions. To my mind, there really is no coherent, convincing strategy or vision. There's no Irish Obama. There's no one really pointing out a sustainable way out of this that joins up what's happening to our society, what's happening to our place in the world, to our politics, and to our economy. And unfortunately, the public anger right now is a mixture of pain, anger, shame, and confusion. The speed at which things are changing is really catching people by surprise and creating confusion for people with mortgages, for business people, for policymakers. And I think people will be less and less willing to bear the pain and bear the burden and bear the unfairness until we have a coherent strategy and vision. And I don't see that yet. Now, I think if you criticize, you also have to propose something that's constructive. And trying to construct a strategy or a vision, I want to propose two starting points. We go back in our history. We have a long and rich history. And we try and find examples of where we had a vision and where it worked. Then we go back to the economic history also of the last 20 years. And we ask ourselves very honestly, what did we do right? So let's start with the vision. We used to have you can call it a vision. Some people call it a sort of an organizing framework in Ireland that described how we lived, the kind of economic decisions we made, how our politicians acted, and broadly speaking it was called the national question. And as a vision it kind of governed Irish politics for about 70 years. Now some people would say the national question isn't fully resolved, but truth be told no longer describes public, social and economic and life in Ireland today. As the title of the book suggests, I want to propose instead of a national question, a global question. Many of the values and the principles are exactly the same. What the global question does is asks, how can a small, open economy preserve its wealth, engage with globalization, and still have a fair and equitable society in the context of a globalized world? And if you look at the kind of the principles that informed the national question, go back to the proclamation of 1916, words like sovereign, indefeasible. Look at people like James Connolly talk about the notion of a free nation. Look at De Valera's response to Churchill in an RTE radio address where he talked about the importance of independence. Really what we want is we want to be able to manage our own destiny, but also have the prosperity of a global world. So that is kind of in a very, I suppose, broad theoretical sense is where a vision might start. And the principles which are, I think still ingrained in us as a people are still the same. Let's turn then to our economy. Very broadly speaking, we can divide the performance of the Irish economy in the last 25 years into two parts. Up to about 2 years ago, a lot of governments around the world, from Chile to China to Bulgaria, were sending their wise men and women to Ireland to discover the secrets of our success. Some of them are still coming, some are still curious, but the part that we're really curious about is the phase kind of 1989 to about 2000, the part I would call the catch-up. They're perhaps less impressed and less curious about the last 7 years, which I would call the bubble period, because a lot of them have seen it before. The Asian countries, a lot of the emerging markets, they had their bubbles 10, 15 years ago. In 1841, there was a guy called Charles Mackay, who wrote a great book called The Madness of Crowds. And the book was a history of asset price bubbles going back to the Crusades. And I'm sure when he wrote it, he thought, well, I'll write this book about these bubbles. People will learn from these mistakes, and we will never have asset price bubbles again. Well, if he was alive today, he would be scribbling busily about the Irish bubble, because it is one of the biggest, most grotesque that we've seen in the last 2 years. And all of the mistakes we've made have been made in France and Britain in 1720, in Britain in the railway boom in 1847, in the US in the 30s, and 10 years ago with the dot-com bubble on Wall Street. The kind of the replacing of the rational with the irrational, the replacing of kind of modesty with greed, the easy money, the consumerism, the materialism, the breaking down in well-established values. And we are now in the midst of the quite brutal correction in our own bubble. And if I look at a whole range of academic papers, be it the IMF or anyone else, unfortunately that correction has got another couple of years to go. And that unfortunately is the brutal truth. However, we shouldn't let this cloud the fact that this country has achieved a lot in the last 20 years, and we did do certain things right. We were never very good at building roads, bridges, the kind of tangible, heavy stuff that you see dominating the Chinese economy. But I think one of the secrets of our success is what I would call intangible infrastructure. Things like education, an entrepreneurial spirit, an open business climate, political stability, generally good institutions, things that are quite difficult to touch. But nonetheless, if you look at companies like Hewlett-Packard, it's the intangible infrastructure that drew them to Ireland. And it's the intangible infrastructure that actually people from other countries, China, Bulgaria, that they come to study and they take away as being a secret of success. And you look at actually all the small economies of the last 10 years that have done well. Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, they've all mastered intangible infrastructure as well. So I think we have to revisit this secret of our success and use it as the basis to go forward. So I want to take these two notions, the notion of the global question. How can we enjoy the fruits of globalization, be independent, but also have a stable society? And how can we revitalize, if you like, or renew our intangible infrastructure? I wanted to put these into a framework. And the framework I was going to propose is a second republic. I was surprised but delighted to hear Enda Kenny voice the same principles. And I would see three stages to our recovery. One is rescue, fixing the banking system, cushioning the deleveraging, the unwinding of the property bubble, then beginning to put in place a durable recovery. And a lot of that will be based on the kind of things that Martin talked about. Competitiveness. I fear, as someone who looks at sort of global markets and global economies, that the world post the credit crisis will be very, very different to the world we kind of left a couple of years ago. Most, if not all, the growth will be in emerging markets. I fear as well that many of the large multinationals upon whom we have rested for part of our economic success will change in shape and structure, and also they will change where and how they invest. So to my mind, they are no longer a given, if you like, pillar of our economic story. And I think increasingly growth in Ireland and entrepreneurship in Ireland really has to come from Irish people, not Irish people working for American or Asian multinationals in Ireland. At this stage, most countries in the world are now moving into recovery phase. The Swiss, the Americans, the English, they've all gone through the phase of rescuing their banking systems. It's been extremely costly. The bill for this mess is going to run into trillions, tens of trillions globally. Unfortunately, when other countries are moving to recovery, and you look, this year China is going to grow by 8%. Unfortunately, we are still mired in rescue. And I personally feel that a lot of the economic decisions taken in the last 8 months are going to leave us in that phase for quite some time, and will leave this state and economy burdened for maybe the next 5 or 10 years. And that, for me, is a cause or an impetus for radicalism. I want to move on to the third part, which is reform. I want to talk about a second republic. I have many of the values that Enda espoused, many of the same values in mind. Ireland has become a much, much less unequal society in the last 10 years. People are used to measuring income equality, but look at wealth inequality. Ireland has arguably become a much less fraternal place. Ireland is probably more liberal, but I think a lot of people are still not free, certainly in an economic sense. It's almost an irony that the leading scholar globally of republicanism is an Irishman, Philip Pettit. And he defines republicanism as a society where, if you like, people are free from domination. And in the last 5 or 10 years, we have not been free from the Celtic Tiger. We have not been free from the bubble, and we have become dominated by the whole, the rationale and the logic of the bubble. And we have lost touch with what's happening to our society, what's happening to our place in the world. So in terms of, what does this mean in a practical sense? Well, the kind of things I would propose are, again, a smaller Dáil, a Dáil that focuses on bigger picture issues, elevate local or council level politicians to maybe provincial level, a much stronger, more powerful presidency. I think also institutions and civil servants to populate them who are very, very well skilled in what I would call technopolitics. When I say technopolitics, we need more civil servants who know about things like physics, economics, languages. If I take as an example the 3 countries which have the highest ratio of banking assets to GDP, they have been Iceland, Ireland and Switzerland. And in Ireland, in the public service, we have relatively few economists, relatively few civil servants who really understand the banking system. In Switzerland, where the banking system is a huge part of their economy, the level and sophistication of civil service there and the breadth of knowledge in terms of the banking system and economics is really profound. And you look at other parts of the Swiss economy, like the food industry, and you get the same kind of institutional quality. I think also there is growing consensus that we need a second republic. Something perhaps revolutionary. It certainly has to be a complete renewal of values and institutions. I think there is growing consensus in the country, of the detail behind a second republic, or rather what a second republic would look like. I think there is much less, if you like, certainty as to who is going to bring about a second republic. My personal view is I don't think any of the current political class is going to do so in a really radical, meaningful fashion, in a revolutionary style. And I'm not sure when this is going to happen and exactly how it's going to happen. A sort of slightly depressing case in point is Japan, a country where a property bubble blew asunder the economy, where government debt levels went to 120% GDP, which is where ours is heading right now. A country that suffered falling house prices for 11 years, that suffered deflation, which is where, unfortunately, we're headed for the next 2 years. And it's only now, 10 years on, that we're beginning to get some significant changes in the Japanese political system. I really hope it doesn't take that long in Ireland. Something that does give me hope, and I think one way in which Ireland has changed, is not so much public life, but the public. There are far more entrepreneurs in Ireland today, people like Martin. Most of them, thankfully, have not had their confidence completely dented by what's happened in the last 2 years. I think there is more open debate in this country. And I think on this basis, I want to thank Joe for inviting me here, because I think this event in particular stands out as one where high quality, independent and serious debate can be had. And to my view, that is where the Second Republic is going to start. It's not going to start in the Dáil, but it's going to start in forums like this. And I am very, very pleased to be here tonight. Thank you.